a ray of hope emerged in the ongoing struggle of horizontal reservation as the Madras High Court issued a directive urging the Tamil Nadu government to consider 1% horizontal reservation for transgender individuals across all caste categories in state-run educational institutions and employment opportunities. So this directive came during the hearing of a public interest litigation filed by a transgender activist, Grace Banu, emphasizing the need for inclusivity and equal protection, equal opportunities. So in this edition of the roundtable, organized by Nickel and Dimes Gender and Society Cluster, we will be discussing the intricacies surrounding horizontal reservation and transgender persons. So first question, what distinguishes horizontal reservation from vertical reservation in the context of addressing social inequalities? And how does the absence of horizontal reservation contribute to discrimination against transgender persons in the society?
I think to understand the distinction, we need to go back to the Supreme Court judgments, starting with Indira Sawhney versus Union of India in 1992 to the very recent one, relatively recent one, Rajesh Kumar Daria versus Rajasthan Public Service Commission, where in the 1992 judgment was the first time when Supreme Court sort of laid down the distinction between the two things, where they said under Article 16(4), where social reservation categories were held, they held that the reservations of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other OBC reservations fall in that specific category, whereas reservations for differently abled persons or women would fall under a special reservations category, which would be horizontal. So essentially, this means further in the Rajesh Kumar Daria judgment, they've explained it very well, that there is a reservation category, and within which you have these special reservations for women, specially able person, and now that we are arguing for is for transgender individuals. So that is how it is, a reservation within the reservation. So essentially, it is that.
Thank you, Zui. How do you think the difference in providing reservation would help empower the transgender community within the Indian societal structure? Yes, Samiti.
So I think this is very similar to how, initially what we call the vertical reservation today for the backward caste, when they were given this sort of reservation, during the what happened for the how Zui mentioned about the Indra Sahani case and then the Mandal Commission that happened. It was for that time that it was introduced so that the people who are a foot back or who might not get opportunities due to certain reasons or certain people's approach towards the society or their thinking towards the society, they are not they are given representation. It's made sure that they do come in forefront because the particular seats that are reserved for them are not provided to any other person. I think it's very similar to how the parliament has a reserved seat for Anglo Indians, again like the backward classes, because it is important so that it's made sure that even within the democracy there is some level of representation. It is the reasons for this would be like almost similar, considering transgenders are minorities in the society. People aren't just not aware but are very non-accepting of them as well. So giving people the power to choose, it'll be very difficult to choose someone or give that sort of same treatment to someone who you do not really recognize on your own. And this is not about me or anyone else, it's a general perspective of the society as of now. It's not very well accepted. The existence of transgender people around is not very well accepted. So providing such sort of reservation will make sure that at some level at some point there is an accountability, there is a sort of opportunity that is given, which is not just based on merit, or there is lesser chance of discrimination just because people do not have the power to sort of go over them, run over them, and just ignore them. This will force the institutions to make sure that the representation exists. And right now, this is I would say this would be the main agenda of why transgender people would require reservation.
Okay, does anybody else want to add on to? Yes, Bhumika.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I think Suniti put it really well, but then just to add on to that, transgender people, mostly we find them coming from a very economically disadvantaged position because how they're, kind of pushed away by the society and they're not accepted in that way. So I think this reservation will help them in the sense that even if they're, already some of them belonging to SC or ST reservation quota, it does not matter because at the end of the day they'll be allowed because they're doubly oppressed. So even if they don't get seats through the SC/ST quota, there's a sure way through these reservations that they get a chance to come up on the stage and have their seat on the table.
Okay, Sampada.
I think I'd just like to add onto and summarize what everybody's spoken about. I think the absence of horizontal reservation for transgender individuals, it contributes to discrimination because it fails to address their unique challenges. I think without special provisions, transgender individuals, they'll face exclusion and unequal opportunities, whether it be in terms of education or unemployment or other sectors. Horizontal reservation is crucial for recognizing and rectifying systemic inequalities faced by these marginalized groups like the transgender community.
Anoushka, you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually, Sampada and Bhumika already covered the point.
Okay, so the word I was looking for mostly was intersectionality. Zoe, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to just raise my hand. So I think when we look at the transgender community, I feel that having vertical reservation would fail in the sense that we have individuals who identify as transgender from across groups. And when we only have a vertical reservation, it does not sort of look at the other intersectionalities with regards to their identity. Because transgender individuals from vulnerable caste backgrounds might not necessarily benefit from a vertical transgender reservation as such, whereas a horizontal reservation in that sense within an SC, ST or OBC reservation categories, transgender individuals getting those seats or getting that reservation would sort of be able to essentially gauge the intersectional discrimination that that community and that group faces. So in that sense, a vertical reservation would not work. So although I completely agree with everyone's points, I really don't agree with the fact that a vertical reservation is a solution here and the horizontal is sort of the way ahead. And I think in that sense, the Karnataka High Court's judgment by the bench presided by Justice Abhay Oak sort of exactly points the same thing out. And even within the Rajesh Daria judgment, they've also looked at the entire idea of how it is able to sort of look at other facets of identity of a particular community when we talk about horizontal reservation as such.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe, for pointing that out. What I mostly see is a vertical reservation looks at a person's identity in much more isolation. When you're talking about an identity of a person, that does not, their lifestyle or their existence in a particular community cannot be looked in isolation of a lot more identities that they already perceive, right? So when we are only providing the transgender community of a reservation from, let's say, their gender, I think they would be, eliminating the Savarna community that also resides within the society, with Savarna transgender community who would obviously prevail the services or the benefits of the government than the person who is economically and socially backward, right? So you cannot put them all in one group. So horizontal reservation in that way makes it broader for the categories to identify within their identity to, prevail much more benefits adjacent to their identities. So also just summarizing what vertical reservation and horizontal reservation is, right? So vertical reservation pertains to the allocation of reserved seats for, let's say, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. It distinctly applies to each specified groups as outlined in the relevant legislation. On the other hand, horizontal reservation entails ensuring equal opportunities for various beneficiary categories, including women, veterans, or transgender community, and individuals within disabilities, let's say. So it is important to know that horizontal quota is implemented individually within each vertical category, and it is not uniformly applied across all of these groups. So horizontal reservation is implemented alongside vertical reservation to ensure a more inclusive and diverse distribution of opportunities. So this approach promotes a broader spectrum of diversity by considering factors such as gender, disability, as I told, the transgender identity. So this aims to create a more comprehensive and equitable system that addresses multiple dimensions of social disadvantage, and it promotes a fair and inclusive society. Moving on to the next question. What were the key directives issued by the Madras High Court regarding the horizontal reservation, and how do the specific demands presented by the petitioners in this case impact transgender persons' rights on broader scale? Does anybody wants to?
I think as far as my reading goes, they've directed the state AG to sort of get further. I'm sorry, the word I wanted to use, further directions from the government with regards to the implementation of 1% of horizontal reservation for the transgender community. Although the sort of prayers of the petitioners go beyond that, here I feel that because in the prayers they've included obviously demanded for reservation. They've also demanded for identity cards for the transgender individuals without a medically, based on self-determination, without any sort of without requiring medical reassignment or health assessment or hormonal therapy or something. I don't think, I'm not aware, I'm not sure whether the Madras High Court has sort of decided anything on that particular regard, but this is as far as my reading goes.
Does anybody else want to add on to that? Okay, just noting down what Zui just talked about the judgment. So the Madras High Court, we already pretty much briefly explained it in our introduction. But the Madras High Court, in response to a petition that was filed by an activist, a transgender woman, Grace Banu. According to their petition, the High Court suggested that the Tamil Nadu government should be considering implementing 1% horizontal reservation for transgender individuals in education and public employment. Currently, transgender women benefit from horizontal reservation for women, while transgender men and those who identify as transgender are categorized based on their caste or under the MBC, which is most backward class community category. So the court, referencing the Nalsa judgment, urged the state to align with the directive of the transgender persons reservation and instructed the Advocate General to seek government instruction by March 4th. So the petition highlighted the Karnataka's policy of 1% horizontal reservation for transgender persons across all caste categories as a potential solution. So in Tamil Nadu, although transgender persons have been categorized under most backward classes group, there is a lack of clear guidelines specifying how reservations in educational institutions and public employment should be extended to them. So the government order included that some of the challenges that were some of the some of the proposals by the petitioners were, I'm just going to highlight what the proposals were. So the petitioner suggested that the suggested horizontal reservation for transgender persons and intersex persons rather than vertical reservation under most backward class. And reservations are vital for integrating these individuals into mainstream society, providing education and employment opportunities. So the implementation of reservation should be horizontal based on gender identity without requiring sex reassignment surgery, was one of the issues that were raised. And recommendations from the Center for Law and Policy Research emphasized that the need for horizontal reservation and self-identification without any medical requirements. Urgent action was so they were urged to address the low education levels and unemployment among transgender and intersex persons. The petitioner called the state of the Tamil Nadu to frame a clear policies and guidelines for horizontal reservation for transgender and intersex persons. So the current identification card and so the process of getting an identification card by the Transgender Welfare Board is criticized for physical and biological examinations, if you guys are aware of that process, contradicting the principle of self-identification, which was derived or which was highlighted in the NALSA judgment. So a clear reservation policy requires a body and adequate transgender community representation, issuing identification cards based on self-identification. So the petitioner, this was filed as a public interest litigation, which sought relief in implementing horizontal reservation for transgender persons and intersex persons. This is like what was pleaded before the court. Is there anything else you guys want to add on to this, or are there any reflections as to how and why the horizontal reservation for the transgender community is still being sought on for, even though this should be pretty evident to the to the to the legislation to already provide it to the transgender persons. Yes, Suniti.
I'm sorry, I wasn't really very well aware. I couldn't read the judgment very properly. But the few articles that I could go through was, and what I feel personally, of course, all of us have read the previous judgment that has come on the transgender, which led to the Transgenders Act 2019 that came into being. The I think the biggest issue which people transgenders are facing as an identification or as people is that the act itself is a little contradictory, or whatever till now that has come through the legislature, or that has come into being under law is very contradictory to what actually to what actually the transgender people really want. There's always been, like what I've read about how there's a societal structure of a family, and the transgender act that came in 2019, that word itself, the word family, has been used, but it has not been defined in terms of what it's defined in a very heteronormative manner only. It's not been explained or given a view to, so that the courts can reflect upon it. And I think the biggest problem is that there is zero representation of the transgender people itself, who need to make laws for, like, to understand what exactly the people need. And on top of that, there is very sort of little awareness about it at the same time. So I feel like till now, how you told that why horizontal reservation is important and why are we fighting still about it. I feel that's because we still haven't been able to really identify what the transgender people need, what are the issues, what are the problems, what are the relevancies, and everything, because the society still does not think them to be a major part amongst the people itself. And I think that is one thing that needs to be beaten. Only then, even if horizontal reservation is provided, only then we can actually provide them with the amount of, like, that sort of relief that we're actually looking for in terms of representation. I'm still a little I still cannot get that, how getting them a reservation in, like, a horizontal reservation in jobs or in educational institutions might sort of like, it's almost similar to what we talk about economically weaker sections. All of them have reservations, but at the same time, when the people are not sensitive enough towards them and the law is not sensitive enough towards them, the reservation really doesn't help it. It's always about the question that um that they're being given a privilege rather than their need to it. I think that is what I could reflect out of this.
Zoe, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think when we look at the struggle of the transgender community as a whole, we realize right from the start, the build up to the NALSA judgment, to after to the Transgender Act coming in being, even after that, the Act also itself has a number of guidelines laid down. But the sort of institutional delays which have come in, which has still further led to more struggles. And when we talk about something which the petitioners also noted on, the self determination of their identity, that is still a problem, because from the NALSA judgment to, as Sunidhi noted, the act is a complete change which brings in medical things which need to be sort of considered before the identity cards are given. Further, identity cards are not given, applications are done, the communities are still not being able to be still not able to have their actual gender identity on their government IDs. They're still called by dead names. So when we look at all these sort of delays on the end of the government, we realize that something like this, uh, these sort of demands coming in states become very necessary. Also, another issue is that the government, despite a number of promises, has not come up with any central legislation which sort of demands for reservation across the areas for transgender individuals. That is also another problem. If we see back for the Differently Abled or the Disability Act, we realize that the central legislation actually helped mandate reservation not only for central government jobs or also for state government jobs, which actually further helped the communities and the individuals get benefit of reservation. So in that sense, that struggle is still going on, and would still continue. But I hope that since Karnataka has recognized horizontal reservation, and I feel Tamil Nadu would soon, I hope that that leads to a sort of domino effect, at least within the southern states, because the southern states are very receptive towards trans rights. Whereas as you sort of move up north, that is not very openly seen, although we have some good policies in Rajasthan with regards to healthcare measures. But I feel until and unless the central government comes up with a proper mandated law, legislation, or a sort of directive to ensure that reservation for transgender individuals must be mandated, I believe the struggle is still on, and it would unfortunately still go on, along with the identity struggle of self-determination. That's my.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for pointing that out. One thing that I wanted to point out to you guys generally is that usage of the terminology, right? We need to always say transgender persons because you always need to give them the personhood that they are, right? You cannot say a transgender when you're addressing a transgender person. So keep that in mind. Moving on with the conversation, absolutely. As you guys pointed out, the Nalsa judgment had fully recognized the right to self-determination, right? But when you look at the act itself, there are various sections which talks about the medical intervention, necessity of medical intervention for that matter. For example, when a transgender person wants to be identified as a woman or a man itself, then they need to undergo certain medical procedure in order to obtain that certificate, or in order to even apply to be identified as a woman or a man. So what also happens is through the procedure, you will require an approval from the district magistrate. So this also takes away your right of self-determining your gender. Yeah, so apart from self-determination too, when you look at reservations, why do you need horizontal reservations over vertical reservation is something that we already talked about. At least from my reflection, I was looking at the percentage of reservation that is given, right? It's 1%. So that is still something that I would want to think about, because 1% reservation isn't very huge, or it still will. This is just something I'm just thinking out loud, because um when even through the horizontal reservation, the ones that will prevail such reservation would be somebody who is more privileged than the person that is within the society. For example, even though a person who is of transgender community, but who belongs to, let's say, a scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, among that person, among those people, the one who is probably more, educated would get the job, let's say, because that is still a privilege to a lot of people. Yeah, this is one of my reflections. Do you guys want to add on to this, or?
I think adding on to your point, I look at always horizontal reservation. I like to be a bit optimistic about it. In the sense, I assume that first, when the slots are filled in for any reservation category, I believe that if we have persons who identify themselves as per any gender based on any reservation. They are first filled in, and then we look at the horizontal reservation quota. So I like to be optimistic, hoping that in the first instance itself, we have more people coming in. And then the quota obviously helps maybe a seat or two, but then if we already have a lot of people coming in, that would help. But again, when we also say that we are giving a horizontal reservation percentage to the transgender community, that means also sort of the calls for um, employment opportunities, which were essentially, I remember the Karnataka judgment. It's the case came up because the advertisement only specified men and women, and maybe when the government is providing reservation, that sensitivity might come in. So there might be a chance that on merit, this is all me being very optimistic, uh, everyone would be considered based on merit. So we could have, maybe this is like a starting point. Again, numbers are something which take away from what the reality is, but maybe 1%, Anvita, could be like a starting point for something more. That's how I look at it.
Definitely, no doubt in that, right? Because when we criticize the Transgender Persons Right of Protection Act, but that is still a starting point to, empower the transgender persons. Obviously, there's always room for criticism, but at the same time, we are we need to, recognize that it is still empowering a lot of lives. Then us sitting in an AC room talking about that does not, make any justice, I believe. So yeah, moving on to like the last question. So how does Nalsa judgment, I'm pretty sure like we've talked pretty much about it, but feel free to just, bring forth ideas if you guys have any. How does the Nalsa judgment address the issue of reservation for transgender persons, and what key points from the judgment contribute to the ongoing debate on horizontal reservation for the transgender community? Does anybody else want to talk about it? You can go Zoe.
uh, so two things. I would digress a little bit from my point to sort of support what I want to say. So essentially, the Nalsa judgment particularly looked at the gender identity argument, not the other intersectionalities which come up as part of the identity of a person. So, in that sense, when they looked at sex discrimination under Article 15 and 16, it was a very sort of single view. And I feel it does support a case for vertical reservation rather than horizontal reservation, because they specifically looked at them as a social and educationally backward group. So technically, it's fulfilling 16 3 1. I'm really sorry, articles. Really bad with article numbers, but essentially looking at vertical reservation. But I feel, in the sense that is also reflected when we look at the sort of discourse within the judgment. We look at the petitioners, we look at the sort of backdrop they represent, uh, especially most of them uh, came from the Hindu community, and a lot of texts the judgment has referred to also uh, stem majorly from the Hindu community. So you already have a constitutional bench sort of also looking at things interconnectedly, a little bit problematic, a little heavy on specific sort of privileges, specific privileged transgender persons in that sense. So that is again a problem because they're only looking at gender identity. So I feel in that, in such a backdrop, I feel society and the community need to argue for a more intersectional understanding of looking at reservation. So that is just one thing which I wanted to sort of bring in.
Does anybody else want to add on to that? Okay. So in this discussion, we explored various legal aspects related to transgender rights, including Madras High Court's suggestion for horizontal reservation, challenges with the current MBC categorization, and the petitioners called for the clear policies in Tamil Nadu. So we also emphasize the need for horizontal reservation based on gender identity as directed by the court itself. In the absence of such provisions in 2019 Act, the Transgender Persons Right to Protection Act, raises concerns, and the petitioners seek the Supreme Court intervention to enforce transgender persons reservation as socially and educationally backward citizens, aligning with constitutional principles and court directives. This was in this was what broadly we discussed about. Thank you so much for joining today's roundtable. Thank you everybody for participating. So